parties contesting both of the York constituencies, York Central and Outer York, to come along and to speak. And I'm delighted that we have our panel of 5 here tonight. Before I introduce them, I hope Theo is going to appear. And hello, Theo. Theo's one of our students. He's just finished his A-levels, and he's come back, and he's been working on some of the polling data. So you're going to share that with us, Theo.
Right, so we're just going to go to the general voting intention first. It'll hopefully appear. Give it a second. We're having tech issues. I'll just explain nationally. The Conservatives and Reform are about neck and neck, but on average they are just ahead. And as we see here, Labour in the lead as it points to nationally. And you know, there's quite a few Green and Liberal Democratic voters in the room as well. And here, slightly bucking the trend, Reform is up against the Conservatives. But we will see a shift if we go to see York Central's results. And we get to see a lot of tactical voting here. So a lot of people who would have voted either Green or Liberal Democrat still backing the Labour candidate. And the Reform still doing better than the Conservatives. And if we see a shift to York Outer, again, Labour thus far doing well, with support from some of the Green Party's voters. And then, again, shockingly, Reform still doing better than the Conservatives amongst the voters here. And the Liberal Democrats sort of neck and neck with Reform. And I think that finishes me up.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Theo. We are going to run another poll towards the end of the evening, so don't vote just yet. Listen to what the candidates have to say, but Theo will return. So our 5 candidates or our 5 members of the panel, I should say, have drawn lots as to who will go first. They're each going to have an opportunity for a 3-minute speech, and after that we will go to the questions. If I could just make a plea, if you have been invited to ask a question, we don't know that you're all here yet, so your card with your name on is over on the table there. If you would be able to go and pick that up, we'll be able to go ahead with that. So first up, for Reform, John, would you like to head over to the podium?
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you all for coming tonight. First, I'd like to say thank you to the school for organising this event. I believe this is going to be one of the most important elections in a generation. And as always, we're hearing the same message. Vote for change. But change isn't enough. Britain needs reform. Now, Reform UK is about a lot more than just immigration. It is an important issue, and all the parties are agreeing to talk about it and to provide ideas on it, and we are no exception. But without an immigration system that actually works, numbers and targets are meaningless. We need government to act, not talk. Speaking of government, too many people have said to me on the campaign trail that they've never voted, or that they're not planning to vote in this election. And they said MPs never listen. This is a tragedy to our democracy. This is why we want to introduce a type of voting system called proportional representation, to give people more of a voice over how they're governed and to make sure that no one is ignored. Reform will also tackle our economy. We want to start by raising the tax threshold up to £20,000 a year. This will help families and workers, as well as pensioners who are struggling with the cost of living crisis. We also want to abolish business rates on the high street for smaller companies. This will reinvigorate our high streets and help our communities rebuild. As for the NHS, we have policies for that as well. What we want to do is restore morale, retain skills, and build capacity for the NHS to succeed. We're going to do this in a number of ways. 2 of our main policies are creating a tax exemption for medical staff, including doctors and nurses, for 3 years, which will significantly incentivise them to remain with the NHS rather than leaving. We also want to allow more medical students to train. There's currently a cap, and we'd like to remove that. Meanwhile, graduates who have already trained will have the student loan paid off on their behalf, pro rata, for serving 10 years in the NHS, again, incentivising staff to remain with us. We have a full set of policies, and they're all fully costed. We know where the money's coming from, and it's certainly not from hard-working people. If you vote for us, we will fight for you and these things in government or in opposition. So I hope you will support me on July the 4th, because change is not enough. Britain needs reform.
John. Thank you, John. I should have said John is the candidate for York Outer, and another York Outer candidate is up next, Michael Kearney for the Greens.
Hi everyone, I'm Mike, I'm from the Green Party. I will try and keep this quick because I know you're all desperate to go and watch the footy, but I am a teacher, so I do like to talk. So I'm standing for the Green Party in York Outer, and in recent years we've seen more and more people are understanding that far from just being about the environment, the Green Party stands for a different way of doing politics and for different policies that can transform our country. Policies that both address the climate emergency, but also ensure that our most vulnerable and excluded people are honoured as valuable citizens and included in the centre of society. That people feel that they, and not politicians millions of miles away, are in charge of their lives, and that we build a secure, fair and stable world where we work with each other and respect each other. Green Party politicians are different. We are known, unlike the others, for integrity and truthfulness, and for prioritising serving people over clinging to power. I have lived in York all of my adult life. I trained as a teacher here in the city, and I'm now working as the elected representative for the National Education Union, representing thousands of educators across the city. During my time teaching, I have witnessed firsthand how years of austerity and inequality has destroyed the lives of thousands of young people and families across York. And austerity is a political choice. It is a choice for billionaire affluence and public squalor. It's a choice that the Tories and Labour have chosen for the next 5 years for us all. I love and adore York, and I believe that we can do better than 5 more years of either Conservative chaos or Labour decay. We can all see that the country is in a total mess. Politics as usual hasn't worked, and the tired old parties have failed us time and again. We need a new approach. That's why the Green Party is growing so rapidly, and the number of Green Party councillors has shot up throughout the country. Our support grows because the Green Party has a credible roadmap to sort out the economy with a costed plan, to build a truly fairer Britain and address the scandalous levels of poverty, to tackle the climate emergency, to rebuild a public NHS, to sort out public transport and to mend the broken housing market. And because the time has come, not just for new policies, but for a new way of doing politics that truly involves people in discussions and decisions that impact their lives. I'm really glad that you've invited me here so that you can talk and ask questions about all of the things that I've spoken about. And if you believe that we need a new way of doing politics on the 4th of July, please do vote for the Green Party. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mike. Next up is Alan Page, who is the York Central candidate for the Liberal Democrats.
Hello, everybody. My name's Alan Page. I'm representing the Liberal Democrats in York Central. I live in York Central. My background is in business, but I'm deeply concerned about this country, but still optimistic about our future. I want to be the MP for York Central because I love York and I want genuine change. Under this Tory government, people are poorer, inequality is worse, our public services are in crisis. Schools are crumbling, the NHS is overwhelmed, and burglaries go uninvestigated. Roads are full of potholes, our rivers are full of pollution. Housing in York is unaffordable, with house prices 10 times the average wage. The Tory party has crashed our economy and cannot be trusted to protect our public services or the environment. The Labour Party is keeping to Tory spending plans, and it's uninspiring. Our public services need investment, and we need to tax banks and energy companies and consider taxing capital gains as well as taxing people's wealth, because we need to invest in social care reform. Only the Liberal Democrats have a plan for social care, including better pay for workers and care staff, which will in turn free up frontline resources in the NHS. The Tory policy of capping child benefit for 2 children keeps hundreds of thousands of children in poverty. The Labour Party will do nothing about this. The Liberal Democrats will change this law. Let's talk about the elephant in the room, Brexit. Brexit is harming our economy and has corroded public trust. Our economy is 6% smaller than it would be if we stayed in the single market and the customs union. And yet, both the Labour Party and the Conservative Party have rejected the EU's plans for a proposal for a youth mobility scheme. The Liberal Democrats would rejoin the single market and deliver growth back to this country. Labour lacks any plan for growth. The Liberal and give businesses confidence to invest in skills and reform business rates. Trust in politics is at a historic low, and the impacts of Brexit, Partygate, betting scandals, and a lack of honesty about past mistakes. We need to decentralise power away from Westminster and empower our communities to make their own choices. Please vote for the Liberal Democrats on the 4th of July for real change. Thank you.
Thank you. Rachel Maskell has passed on her apologies, but I'm delighted that we have her agent, her electoral agent, Danny Myers, to speak for Labour. Danny.
Good evening, everybody. Yeah, the keenest eyes among you see that I'm not Rachel Maskell. Rachel sends her deepest apologies. She does place very high regard for Hustings, particularly at Bootham, and is very apologetic for not joining us this evening. As her agent and friend, I'll do my best to fill her large boots by saying that a vote for Labour is a once-in-a-generation opportunity at this election to bring about change in this country that is desperately needed. We need to stabilise our economy, rebuild our public services, and lead once again on the global stage. Everyone amongst you will know that there are problems with public services, particularly trying to get a doctor, GP, or a dentist appointment when you need one. Millions are left languishing on NHS waiting lists. Mortgages and rents are sky high. Crime is more prevalent and it's more violent in some places. Energy prices out of control. Food, fuel, everything squeezing the household budget as wages have more or less flatlined in 14 years. Labour has got a manifesto to bring about change in each of those areas, 5 missions and much more besides it. Building economic stability, a new deal for working people, ending fire and rehire, stopping the gig economy exploiting working people. And we're really ambitious in York to rebuild our local economy with advanced rail and the creative and digital sectors. In York, we've got an acute housing crisis. Labour will build the houses that we need on a scale not seen since the last Labour government post-war, who achieved 1.5 million houses in one electoral term, and that was the radical Attlee government, one we aspire to replicate this time, and that will include council housing, and it will make a difference. I've much more to say. Rachel, in a kind way, has just given me loads of information, so I'll try and just pull it down to my last 30 seconds by saying you may well be aware of Rachel's record here in York over her last 9 years as your representative. You know that she works hard, she delivers for York, I ask that you consider giving her your support to be part of the change that this country needs by re-electing Rachel Maskell to serve in a Labour government that makes a difference. Thank you.
Thank you. And finally, our Conservative candidate for York Central, Richard Hudson.
Good evening. Let me ask you a question. What do all these have in common? Upgrading the York Outer Ring Road, the upgraded accident and emergency in York, York Central, a new diagnostic centre for the city. These are all projects which, without the Conservatives, wouldn't have been delivered in York. What's more, they're all projects which deliver prosperity, drive aspiration, and make York the best place to live and work. If it was left to Labour, it would mean more hours spent stuck in the horrendous traffic which already strangles the city. There'd be fewer new homes, making the prospect of getting on the housing ladder even harder. And with increasing demands on our health service, access to care would slow down. So my plan for York Central is to supercharge investment into the infrastructure of the city, attracting investment and providing opportunities for people like you to live and work here. Investment in transport is critical. There needs to be a joined-up approach, including buses, cycle lanes, and road upgrades like the Ring Road and the dualling of the A64, which together move people in and around York and the surrounding area, and that drives the economy of the city forward. I also want to drive development with exciting projects such as accessing our beautiful riverside, fueling quality retail, leisure, and housing. Healthcare is the #1 issue on the doorstep. We need radical reform so that you can access the care that you deserve. That's why we need a brand new fit-for-purpose hospital. And I will dedicate myself to doing all that I can, if elected, in delivering a new hospital located outside of the city centre, which is capable of coping with the needs and demands of York. So the choice at this election is clear. A vote for me, someone who has a plan to make York a better place to live and work, or a vote for Labour, who have had almost 10 years in York Central and done little more than blame others for their lack of progress. They don't have a plan. They remain completely silent, both locally and nationally, about what to do for York.
Thank you very much. And thank you for testing the bell function on the timer, which I didn't know about. Very good. Do we have Lisa Moynihan-Martin in the audience? Oh, this doesn't happen to Dimbleby, does it? I'm going to ask the question that she had because I think it's very pertinent given that we are in a school. So Lisa put forward this question. What do you consider to be the greatest challenge facing children in the UK at the moment, and what will you do to address it? And I'm going to throw that first of all to Danny.
Thank you very much, Daniel. Oh, I don't know where to begin. It's such a big issue. I've got 2 young children, 6 and 2. I'll start by saying Labour has got a plan for the next generation. And I'll put it to you that from 97 to 2010, many people in the room will have seen the difference that a Labour government made by spending more money than any governments before it or after do on education. And I think that's what you can expect from a future Labour government, because we will do the same, and proudly so. More of our national GDP, our economy, will go into education spending. And you will see the results. I certainly did. Sure Start Centres were one of the most amazing projects that the last Labour government delivered. A real jewel in that government's crown, because instead of having skeletal services in communities, you suddenly got major investment into state-of-the-art new hubs for families to go to, and it wasn't just going to them, you were dragged into them. I come from a deprived area in West Yorkshire. I spent some time growing up in after coming of age in East London, and I saw exactly the same thing. It's about community outreach, and it's about bringing the next generation up with some investment. And for 14 years, those young people have been so badly let down without a future to look forward to, because the promise, Daniil, I'll finish, the promise of this country should be that the next generation does better than the last, and that is utterly broken, and Labour will change that for the better.
Thank you. "14 years," that gets mentioned a lot. Richard, can I throw it over to you?
Yeah, by all means. So education, some say it's the closest thing that we have to a silver bullet. It's something that I would subscribe to. The Conservatives are proud of their achievements in education. So for York, for example, when we came to power in 2010, 68% of the schools in York were good or outstanding. That's now at 92%. That's how much we've progressed in York, specifically within York, and this is all across the country where standards have increased. We outperform Wales, a devolved nation where education is devolved to Labour, in English and maths. That is something that is happening right here, right now. Last time Labour were in power, the UK fell down the leagues in education. We have got it going back the other way. They're increasing. We're outperforming a lot of nations. We really do value education. And one thing I would like to say on education, if we're on education, just on the VAT, on the private schools, which I'm sure is really pertinent to you all here, this is the politics of envy. There are statistics here that have come out that say that up to 134,000 pupils will leave independent schools because of the VAT that's placed on them. That's going to cost the state an extra £1.6 billion. And I'll just finally say, Labour value your education that much that the bus service to Tadcaster Grammar under the Labour Council here in York was cut.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Richard. I will invite Mike for the Greens to respond to the question, please.
So, like I mentioned before, I am the National Education Union Secretary in the city, so I see what is happening in schools across York. And in terms of one of the biggest issues facing children in this generation, it is around education. And the Conservative candidate talked about the progress since 2010. Well, I will tell you what the progress is actually since 2010 in schools. We now have the largest class sizes in this country in 40 years. About half of all schools in York have come to me to talk about redundancies and restructures because there is not adequate funding. And there are reports of schools in York who are planning class sizes of 60 because of the lack of funding. If that is progress in 14 years, I would be ashamed. In terms of other things, apart from... And another thing that is another huge issue facing children in this country is poverty. And so the Joseph Rowntree Foundation last year showed that about 3 million adults in this country are facing abject poverty, including over 1 million children. That is a disgrace. And the Green Party unlike the Labour or the others, we will end the disgraceful cap on the two-child limit for benefits, and unlike Labour, who will not end that cap, but they will end the cap on bankers' bonuses. So we know exactly where the priorities lie for the two main parties. So we will scrap that, we will increase child benefits, and we will increase funding into a range of different things to support children throughout every stage of their lives.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mike. John, what would Reform say is the greatest challenge facing children in the UK?
Well, you know, I can't believe I'm saying it. I do tend to agree with some of the things I've heard, because actually overcrowding, I think, is one of the biggest issues. And one of the things we can do to alleviate that is potentially, you know, go the opposite of Labour's policy of taxing, adding VAT to private school fees, but actually going the other way and having a tax relief instead. One of our pledges is to have a 20% tax relief on independent school fees. So if you're paying £30,000 a year, you get tax relief 20% at £6,000 a year. Obviously, it's not the full price off your tax bill, but it's enough that it will incentivise some people to make that switch. And by making that switch, what we're doing is taking people out of state-funded schools and just putting a few of them in private schools as well, which I'm sure you'd be very grateful for. But as well as that, the state schools are a bit smaller, and we don't have to worry quite so much about class sizes there. That's one of our things. Another one is also, I don't think life skills are taught quite as much as they should be in schools. I mean, I certainly left schools. When I left school, I didn't necessarily know what a mortgage was. I didn't necessarily understand how tax worked. We want to change that and make sure actually in schools people are taught not just educational things, but also, you know, life skills to carry them through as an adult as well.
Thank you very much. Thank you, John. And Alan, what would the Lib Dems say?
Okay, the question is about children, and I guess the biggest challenge for children in society today is the 300,000 that are living in poverty because of the cap on benefits that the Tories have put in that the Labour Party are not going to get rid of. It's an absolute disgrace. It's a very easy thing to do, and the Labour Party are choosing not to do it. If you're living in poverty, and we're talking about a huge amount of money, we're talking about, in some families, £3,000 to £4,000 a year, which is how much worse off they are because of this punitive tax. Now, if you move on in terms of age and I guess in terms of children at school, the Liberal Democrats would invest in terms of a mental health professional at every school. We would increase funding per pupil ahead of the rate of inflation. But also we need opportunities for our young people as well. So a big investment in apprenticeships. Apprenticeships have been a disaster under the current government, with something like 52% of people not finishing their apprenticeship, which is bad for the individual, but it's also bad for the country. A lot of this is to do with what we pay apprentices who are earning less than half the minimum wage. This needs to change and would change under a Liberal Democrat government. As you leave school, we want opportunities. There are less opportunities than there used to be for our young people because we've made the decision that there is no free movement now around Europe. Opportunities to work overseas are not there because of the short-sighted decision that we've made to leave the EU. Now, we're not suggesting in our manifesto to rejoin the EU, but certainly allowing our young people to move around Europe and to benefit and to gain skills there seems like an obvious thing to do. The last point that I would make, and I know I've gone on a little bit too long, is about housing. So housing is unaffordable in this country, and our young people want to get onto the ladder. I'm not sure this is a children question, but it's also a challenge too.
Thank you. Just before I open this up, a couple of our speakers there have highlighted poverty and the two-child limit on the child allowance. Danny, have you got a response to that?
Yeah, happy to. It's not something that we put in our manifesto. We will change at this moment in time, and I think that indicates a cautiousness that I share as being a minor concern if you were to discuss it as a single issue. What I'd say to you is that the last Labour government brought millions of children out of poverty. And it's a major achievement that investment into communities and into families made possible. I again would put it to you to consider that a future Labour government will be able to achieve as much again as we've seen since 2010, the figures going backwards, 1 million more children in poverty now than when Labour left office. It's a major priority for us, and if the two-child benefit cap is something that will make a difference, then the next Labour government is definitely going to review that. So I don't take major truck with us not putting that specific issue in our manifesto. I ask you to consider our direction of travel and what you will expect from a Labour government.
Okay, thank you. And Richard, it was the Conservative government that brought in that two-child cap. Could you briefly just comment on that?
Yeah, so as you've alluded to, we removed the two-child cap. It's not something that we would seek to replace. Sorry, we removed the cap on two children. What we are doing and what we have done in support of families, we've supported by £900, 713,000 families in Yorkshire. There are support mechanisms out there for childcare, 30 hours free childcare. We've actually extended that now down to 9 months. So there are other support alternatives out there that will help people get out there, get into work, and that's what we want to do, to effectively make work pay and not just subsidise families with ever-growing families.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. We've got a number of young people in the audience. I don't know if anyone wants to contribute to this question from the floor. Put your hands up if you do, or we can move on. Okay. The next question then, I did wonder in terms of challenges for children, whether the environment might come up. We've got a question from Lizzie from... Was that you, Lizzie? From Lizzie from the Robert Wilkinson Academy. Is Lizzie here? Lizzie, have we got a microphone for Lizzie? Could you just bring that over? Thank you.
Can you tell us how you intend to firstly hold water companies to account and secondly ensure that our rivers and seas are biodiverse and safe for us?
Thank you very much. Mike?
So, thank you so much for that question. I know Robert Wilkinson's school really well. I go in there quite often, so it's lovely to see you here tonight. Climate change is the most pressing issue of our time, and it's an issue that the main parties are willing to ignore. When it comes to water in particular and the scandal over the pumping of sewage into our rivers and seas, it is an absolute disgrace. And the Green Party, unlike Tories or Labour, we will end privatisation of the water companies and bring them back into state control. So that water is something that is for the public good. And what's really concerning about water moving into the future is you may not be aware, but Yorkshire Water have asked Ofwat to increase our bills by 46% by 2030. We would not allow that to happen. Yorkshire Water is a disgrace. They made £723 million of profit in the last 2 years alone, and they have paid out over £62 million in dividends to their shareholders. And when Labour and the Tories say that we can't have state-run water companies, have a look at who owns Yorkshire Water. One of the largest shareholders in Yorkshire Water is GIC, which is a Singaporean wealth fund wholly owned by the Singaporean government. So it is a publicly owned company. It's owned by the Singapore government, and we believe it should be owned by the British government. So so from now all of those profits and all of those dividends would go into our water companies to stop the scandal of sewage entering our rivers and seas.
Alan?
Yeah, this is an issue that's really close to the Liberal Democrats' hearts in terms of we've been campaigning on this for years. It's suddenly been picked up by the other parties, with the exception of the Greens, who have been entirely supportive about this, but the sewage scandal needs to stop. How will we do that? As the Liberal Democrats, we'd set legally binding targets to prevent sewage dumping into bathing water in highly sensitive nature sites. We'd introduce a sewage tax on profits of water companies. We'd ban bonuses for water companies until discharges and leaks end, and we'll implement a new blue flag status for rivers. The other thing that we do, which the Labour Party and the Tory Party both voted to weaken Ofwat recently, including the York Central Labour Party MP, we would replace Ofwat with a tough new regulator called the Clean Water Authority, with new powers to prevent sewage dumping. So this is a real issue, and I'm really glad it's got traction, but this is one of the issues that's been driven by lots of people in the Liberal Democrats seeing it as a key issue. And what I'm really surprised about, not surprised, but it resonates with people around the country because it's also symptomatic of what's wrong with our country. Like potholes, our roads are in an appalling state, our rivers are full of sewerage. And that's a reflection of the Tory government, and the Labour Party unfortunately has no plans to change things. Lizzie, thank you very much for the question, by the way.
Thank you. Danny, does the Labour government have, or Labour Party have plans to change things if in government?
Yeah, absolutely. Labour will put the water companies in special measures so that they are forced to clean up the waters. And, you know, that is something that you'd expect a new government coming into office to start a challenge. It's a massive challenge because even just last year, 1,400 sewage releases took place in York Central alone. If you just try to look across the country at those figures, it's really astronomical, and it is a disgrace. It's not something that the Labour Party is blind to. We will take action on that. Rachel specifically firmly believes in a nationalised water industry and nationalise the key sectors of our economy. Rachel believes firmly in public ownership, and I'd expect her to continue to be a very proud advocate for that economic model. Particularly on the water industry, she's spoken out many times in Parliament about how it should be a nationalised industry. And I think having Rachel's voice inside a Labour government is very powerful in terms of being part of the grouping that believes in a different way of doing things economically for our key industries. I'll just finish by saying as well that she works very closely, or has worked very productively with Surfers Against Sewage, which are working right along our east coast to try to stop those sewage releases in our beautiful beach resorts.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Just before we move on, you've said that's Rachel's view. Is that the policy of the Labour leadership?
So no. Good question, Daniel. The policy of the Labour leadership, forgive me for not having the manifesto, but it is that we will put the water companies into special measures so they clean up our waters. And
that's but not nationalise them.
No, not nationalise them. Not at this stage.
Not at this stage. Okay, thank you, Richard.
Thank you very much. I think it's worth noting that under the Conservatives, from 2016, only 5% of rivers were and sewer outlets were actually monitored. So it's under the Conservatives that's got up to nearly 100%, and it's actually exposed this situation because prior to that there wasn't the monitoring there, and it likely has occurred for years and years and years. So moving forward, absolutely, we recognise that there's an issue here and it needs to be tackled. So in our manifesto, what we're looking to impose is that any fines that are imposed onto the water companies, that they'll be ring-fenced into river quality so that they will go straight there and not drop into a huge pot. They'll look to remove the limit on fines, which is currently capped at around £250,000. They did table legislation for that, so it's something we're taking absolutely seriously. And also there was a storm overflows reduction plan. I won't bore you with all the details, but there's a huge amount of investment that's going into this, and it's all throughout. It's in Wales, it's in the Ouse, it's on the south coast. It really needs to be addressed, but they are coming down on these water companies very hard. The Conservatives recognise that, and there is a plan, obviously, to have that so that by 2035, the designated bathing waters and the majority of the most sensitive and protected habitats are free from sewage discharges, and by 2050, that they've eliminated all adverse effects from storm overflows. So we do have a plan moving forward, and we are looking to hold these water companies to account for discharging the sewage into our waters.
Thank you. Thank you, Richard. And John, what would Reform be doing here?
So we've got a policy on this. What we want to do is part nationalise it. So we want to have 50% ownership by the state, so kind of meeting in the middle there. And we want to have the other 50% owned by UK pension funds. So what it will be is, it'll be in everyone's interest to make sure it does work properly. And obviously, we want to avoid sewage in rivers. It's not a good thing to happen, and we do want to avoid that, especially in York. Obviously, we do get floods sometimes, so the better the water quality is, potentially the less unpleasant, at least the floods will be. So we want to make sure if we can take proper control of these industries through part nationalisation and part private equity, we can actually ensure that they don't commit river pollution again in the future. And to touch on the other issue, obviously we talked about making sure rivers and seas are protected. I think actually one of the big problems, not just water quality, but also what's in the water. We have a lot of problems with plastic pollution. I'm sure you're all aware of that giant garbage patch in the, I believe it's the Atlantic. Forgive me if I've picked the wrong ocean. But that is a big issue, and I think actually what we should be also looking at, and something that I believe in quite strongly, is stopping littering and trying our best to make sure that doesn't happen, it doesn't get into our ecosystems.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, John. Do we have Llewellyn here, a student from Millthorpe School? Llewellyn, no, oh dear, 2 out of 3. I'm going to ask the question for Llewellyn. I should have said this is an event hosted by the Independent State School Partnership, so we have invited all of our local York schools along to this. Llewellyn asks this: with increasing tensions around the world, how would you propose a way of keeping Britain safe in a stable Europe? I think 5 years ago we were talking a lot about Europe and Brexit, weren't we? Can I throw this over to John?
Absolutely. So we've got a couple of policies on this. Firstly, our armed forces, we don't have enough people in the army at the moment. We don't want to force people in. We want to make it a more attractive proposition for them to choose. So one thing we do want to do, if we are elected, is to introduce an urgent pay review to make sure that soldiers aren't earning less than, say, an Amazon worker. As well as that, we want to increase overall defence spending. At the moment, it's in the low 2%, so we want to bring that up to 3% of GDP within around 5 years. We don't want to just be a part of NATO, we want to lead NATO and make sure we continue to be an important global player in terms of defence, and make sure that whatever happens, we do have the resources to defend ourselves in a crisis. What I was talking about earlier is, in the event of a large war, we don't want to be a country that gets invaded and then liberated later. We want to be a country that avoids being invaded in the first place. So defence is really important to us.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Richard.
So as the Conservatives, you've probably heard in our manifesto as a pledge to get to 2.5% of our GDP on defence spending by the end of Parliament. It was actually mooted perhaps to go further at the point, but the manifesto pledge is 2.5%. Something else which has concerned me that I'm really glad to actually see in our manifesto is energy security. And what we're looking to do is build new nuclear power stations alongside green energy, but to give us the security in a more disorderly world saw what has happened when we put embargoes and sanctions onto Russia, which was required, and everyone's energy bills went through the roof. Russia started to weaponize our energy supply. We ended up in a situation with gas lines, Nord Stream 1 and 2 were bombed. So we're actually looking to impose security on our energy so that we can sustain ourselves, and then equally alongside that, within our manifesto is food security, because that's something that's really relevant here, because it's again a concern of mine and the Conservatives that we aren't growing enough food for ourselves within the country. We saw how that impacts inflation, and actually we're ending up with lots of renewable energy solar fields as you drive into York that are on very, very good productive arable land. So there'll actually be something written into law to give us that security of our own food and security of the country in three-pronged: defence, energy and with our food.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Could I just ask you, this pledge to increase GDP, the 2.5% of GDP on defence, how's that going to be paid for?
The payment of the the payment of the defence up to 2.5%, the payment of 2.5% of the GDP, it's fully costed within our manifesto through a variety of cost-saving measures. We're implementing a lot of different ones. For instance, I know the NHS budget is ring-fenced, but we're going to take 5,500 managers out of the NHS to pay for improvements there. What we're actually looking in regards to GDP in defence spending is tax evasion. There's a huge gap between actually the tax take and what we can
It's savings. It's savings. Okay, thank you. Alan.
Yeah, we live in dangerous times, and the Conservative government has cut the army. We have a longer-term ambition of increasing regular troops back to over 100,000. We would continue our support for NATO and accordingly increase defence spending every year in Parliament with an ambition to reach 2.5%. We would maintain our nuclear deterrent with 4 submarines, providing continuous at-sea deterrent while pursuing multilateral global disarmament, and we would control arms exports to countries with poor human rights. Just one thing on that. The other thing that I think is important is a lot of the conflict, a lot of the concern about around the world is also because of the challenges in those individual countries. Some of the reasons that we have high levels of immigration is because people are leaving desperate places. What we would seek to do is restore the UK's reputation as an international development superpower by returning spending to 0.7% of national income and re-establishing an independent international development department. We have a lot of soft power, but this is really important in terms of investing. We are a rich country. We need to invest in ensuring that there is stability and democracy around the world.
Thank you very much. Danny.
Yeah, thank you, Janelle. Thank you for the question. I think I'd argue that Britain's fallen backwards on the international stage, and it's been really difficult to watch over the last 14 years as the government have gone through prime ministers and foreign secretaries, and we have less influence now than what we did before the Conservatives came to power, and I think Labour will change that. We will develop a new relationship with Europe. That has to be done. And we will work with global partners to de-escalate the risk that we see around the globe at the moment. And it does come from climate change, population displacement, and conflict that sees people moving around the world, and there's no clear leadership in Britain to tackle either migration or climate change as issues. I think there are points to make about the armed forces, much lower in numbers now than what they were, but also the purpose of the armed forces and how they can help in international development, etc., rather than being troops in the traditional sense. And Labour does have a lot to say about reforming international development. So as we saw it through the last Labour government, we were a world-leading provider of international development, very proudly so, to spend the money in areas of the world that needed support and help by delivering British aid, genuine aid, that needed to happen. And that does tackle conflict and population displacement. And I think my example on that would be to say we had really towering figures leading the Labour Party at that time that spent a lot of energy, such as Gordon Brown, on ensuring that our country was at the forefront of trying to make the world a better place. And I expect that from the next Labour government as well.
Thank you very much. We've heard from the Conservatives and Liberal Democrats that 2.5% of GDP would be spent on defence. Is that something that Labour would be matching?
I'm really sorry, I don't know that answer.
That's fine, thank you. Can we go over to Mike then, for the Greens?
Yes, what I found really interesting in what people, and when all the parties were giving their answers, is that they almost all immediately went straight to defence. As if we can bomb our way out of our problems. We can't. Britain's problems are global problems. We can only solve them by working with our partners and friends across the world. We need to end the rhetoric of the Conservative Party over the last 14 years, where they've demonised the EU. And a couple of years ago, senior Conservative politicians could not answer whether France was our friend or our enemy. France is our friend. One of the greatest threats facing us and the entire globe, which is recognised by governments across Europe, is climate change, because it is going to destabilise and change the way that billions of people live around the globe. And one of the challenges that we are going to face is about movements of people. We are currently facing that right now in this country, and that's one of the biggest issues that our government is trying to tackle, and tackle quite poorly. They believe that the Rwanda scheme, where they sending one person to Rwanda is going to cost £1.8 million, is an effective use of taxpayer money. It's not, it's a disgrace. We would scrap the Rwanda scheme, and we would work with our global partners and work with partners in the EU to solve issues around immigration, because how we treat people in the UK is reflective of our values and our national character. And what people in the Conservative Party or Reform seem to forget is we are a country of immigrants. I am a primary school teacher, and I teach my children history every single day. I teach them about the fact that our country is made up of Romans and Vikings and Anglo-Saxons, immigrants who have come to this country and enriched our country, and that's why we need to completely change the rhetoric over what we do and say around immigration into this country, because it's going to be a massive, massive issue that's facing us because of climate change in the future. So we would end the hostile environment policy, end minimum income requirements for spousal visas, and provide safe routes for people fleeing war and persecution around the world.
Thank you. Are there any contributions from the floor on this question? Have we got microphones that could come over? Yes. Thank you.
Do you think we should stop arming Israel, which is at the present time engaged in a genocide?
I think these need to be very brief responses to this. Richard?
My understanding is to the extent that we arm Israel is in the 0.0% the amount of arms that actually go through to Israel. So that's my understanding as far as I'm aware of statistics. I think it is incredibly minimal, the amount of arms that actually, and I don't think it's necessarily arming them. I think it's arms exports.
Okay, thank you. Mike?
I'll keep it simple. Scrap it all. We should never have been arming Israel in the destruction and the genocide from the Gaza. Stop it.
Danny.
Yeah, Rachel's really clear on this issue. That you shouldn't be arming. As I understand it, she's said that you shouldn't be arming Israel, but she has spoken in Parliament many times about arming various regimes around the world. She uses every opportunity in Westminster to say that arms sales should not be happening. Britain should stop selling arms. Particularly, she made a significant contribution on arms against selling arms to Saudi Arabia.
Okay, thank you. Alan?
Very quickly, by the way, it's a la carte with the Labour Party. You can either listen to what Rachel says or you can go to the manifesto. The Liberal Democrats are advocating an immediate bilateral ceasefire, and we have been since, I think, November of last year. We're amongst the first parties to do that. It's a humanitarian catastrophe in Gaza. We continue to call for that ceasefire. We would suggest a two-state solution, and in the Liberal Democrat manifesto, we would recognise Palestine as Ireland has done, and Norway has done, and Spain has done, because we are a progressive party.
Thank you. And John?
Yeah, so Reform doesn't have a specific policy on this at the moment. I would say that the conflict probably has gone too far. I mean, obviously we've all seen the images, and far too many civilians have been injured in the war. So what I would say is, while we don't have a party policy on it, on a personal level, it is probably time to draw the conflict to an end. Obviously, it is a complicated issue, and it's been going since the 1940s, and I'm sure it'll keep on going into the 2040s. But on the present situation, I think it is time for that to stop, and probably our involvement in it too. I think what we should do is, see what the International Court says. Obviously, there have been, claims made against Israel, and if they seem to have teeth, then maybe we should say, actually, if they have done something wrong, we should probably, step back and not be a part of that anymore.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. We are about to go into our last question, and the elves up in the booth have asked me to remind you that you can be involved in voting in the poll. So during this next question, please do. You all seem to know what to do. I haven't got a clue what this is. But if you could, yes. So if you could be thinking about that, we've got our last question. I am going to ask panel members just to keep their answers to 1 minute. The time has come up again. We know what happens if it hits 0. So could I invite Colleen? Colleen, is Colleen here? Colleen, thank you. Have we got the microphone? Thank you very much.
Thank you. We have no NHS dentists available in York, a year waiting list to be seen at some departments in York Hospital, and doctor surgeries that take a week to get an urgent appointment. What are you going to do to improve the health services in York and elsewhere across the UK? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Richard, you've said something about health already, but could you address perhaps the dentistry crisis?
So I accept that healthcare people aren't receiving the care that they deserve at the moment. There are issues surrounding it. So in our manifesto, we have quite a plethora of policies that are there, including a long-term workforce plan, which is to increase the workforce. It's going to be supported by 2.4 billion funding. That will include more dentist training. There's also a specific dental recovery plan, which actually makes dental treatment, because part of the issue here is that dentists are just exiting from the NHS. It's just not worth them doing. So that will increase what we're actually going to pay dentists and create 2.5 million appointments, and that will be funded by £100 million. NHS budget has increased under the Conservatives by 33% since 2010. Above inflation increase, and we've also got here the Pharmacy First. There's the general NHS, so we've got Pharmacy First, which should free up 25 million appointments.
Thank you very much. Just as the bell was about to go, thank you. If I could ask Alan to speak on this.
Yeah, specifically about dentists, because I think that's what the question, Colleen, was about. Guaranteed access to NHS dentists for everyone needing urgent and emergency care, ending DIY dentistry and dentist deserts, which is what we've got in this country, unfortunately. We need more dentists, we need more doctors as well. We have a plan for getting 8,000 more GPs on the front line. The reality is we aren't going to train all of these straight away. We need to bring some of them in from overseas. So the nonsense we're getting from some of the other parties around net migration of zero means that we're going to have no doctors and no dentists looking after the people. The other point I make very quickly is around social care. The investment that the Liberal Democrats are going to make or planning to make in social care means that frontline services will be freed up and there will be more opportunity for people to focus and free up beds in the NHS.
Thank you very much. John.
Sorry, the question's about York.
Okay, thank you. John.
Yeah, so we've got a couple of policies on this. Obviously in my opening statement I did talk about that briefly about having a 20% tax relief. Sorry, 20%, lifting that 20% level of basic tax for 3 years for NHS workers, which would include dentists. Because what we want to do is, encourage people to stay with the NHS rather than go in private. I also mentioned about the training cap for medical school places, and that's really important. This is more of a long-term plan, but it will have a big impact because at the moment there are caps on training places. Dentists do go to medical school, do a slightly different course of training, but they are medical school students, and we don't want that cap to be there anymore. As well as that, there is a pension cap as well within the NHS, and a lot of people, senior medical professionals, do reduce their hours at the end of their career to make sure they don't hit that cap. We'd like to remove that to encourage hard-working professionals to stay in their job instead of taking early retirement or reducing their hours, which would increase availability, which I think is really important.
Thank you. And can we move on to Mike?
Yes, just to address when you say about York, one of the things about that, just about what everyone has been saying, is that when I'm talking about the policies that we are proposing in our manifesto, it's about putting money into NHS England, which will impact everybody in York. So we will all see the benefits of the money going in. In terms of the NHS, what Labour and the Tories are not being honest with you about is that the NHS is facing its biggest crisis in 80 years, and it can only be solved with extra money. At the end of the day, that's the only way to solve this crisis. And the Green Party are planning the largest increase in NHS funding of any of the political parties sat on this stage, with at least 12 billion in the first year alone just to NHS England, and 3 billion a year into NHS dentistry. That would genuinely reduce waiting lists and give people rapid access to GPs and bring NHS dentists back into the city. And just talking about the fact that this is about money, it's that Nuffield Trust has analysed Labour's plans for spending on the NHS if they win power, and they have said that their manifesto shows a 1.1% increase in funding,
Mike.
which is less than
Mike.
what the Tories gave to the NHS during the height of austerity.
Mike,
so
Mike, we need to close you down.
Mike,
Mike, sorry.
For NHS austerity.
Mike, thank you very much. And Danny, Rachel has been MP for York Central. Could you address the question finally?
Yeah, thank you. I will address the question, but I'll also say that those figures that we're talking about, reflective of the way that the economy will grow under Labour, and we will be able to put more money into our healthcare system, which we very proudly created and rescued the last time we were in government. I remember, I can't tell this story, but I will move on to dentists very quickly about in York. Labour will reform the dental contract. It hasn't been renegotiated or rewritten since the last Labour government, and that's why the most common reason for 5 to 9-year-olds being admitted to hospital is because they're having their rotting teeth extracted. This can't go on. Labour will rescue NHS dentistry and the NHS more widely, as you'd expect it to. Finish there, didn't I think?
Thank you. Okay, thank you very much. So we are now just going to allow each of our panel members to have a 30-second summary. The clock is on. They're going to be doing it in the reverse order of their opening remarks. So could I invite Richard to start off?
Thank you. Well, thank you very much for having us all here this evening. And as I said at the start, the choice is very clear here. It's either a vote for myself and the Conservatives, and we do have a bold plan with tangible things which you can point to make it better, including healthcare, improved infrastructure and more homes. York even features in our national manifesto for the Conservatives. Or there's Labour, who don't have a plan. There are just generic statements which come out and about. They don't send their candidates, either one of them, just smacks of complacency. And all I will say is that just the tax rises that might be coming forward under Labour, £2,094 will feel like a drop in the ocean.
Okay, thank you very much. Danny.
Yeah, thank you. 30 seconds. I'd say it really is a moment in time where we can make a difference by backing Labour and backing Rachel to be the next MP in York Central and for get on side with a Labour government. Rachel's a campaigning MP. She's independently minded. She works hard for the city and she delivers. I'd ask you to give her your consideration to keep representing you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Alan, for the Lib Dems.
Okay, very quickly, the Liberal Democrats' manifesto is bold, ambitious and fully costed, and it's a plan to fix the NHS and fix the care crisis. It's a bit difficult because Rachel's not here. I don't want to accuse her of complacency and so on, but York Central is going to be a Labour constituency after the next election, but I plead with you not to vote Labour. Vote Liberal Democrat, because it's every vote that we get for a Liberal Democrat is a vote to support a strong local person who's going to fight every day for the NHS and fairness in our society.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Mike, for the Greens.
Yes, I just want to pick up on something that Richard said when he said it's a choice between Tories and Labour. If that's really the choice that we face, and this country is in a dark, dark place. A vote for Labour or the Tories is a vote for 5 more years of austerity, NHS privatisation and public sector destruction. Rachel, as he keeps saying, is an independent-minded person. She is not an independent-minded person. She is standing on a Labour platform for a Labour manifesto. They are going to win massively in York this year, so please vote with your conscience and vote for the parties that are offering real progressive change in this election.
Thank you, Mike. And John.
I said at the beginning of this event that it is going to be one of the most important elections in a generation, and that is definitely true. And as my colleagues have touched on, we've got a choice of another 5 years of Westminster establishment government, or we can choose a fresh new option. But they are right. Labour is going to be in power on July the 5th. The only question is who is going to be in opposition. Rishi Sunak thinks it's going to be him, but I hope you will take my advice, don't bet on it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So that concludes what we're doing here. We've got Theo coming out in a minute, but I do have to remind everyone that we're not just seeing the 5 parties that are standing. There are other candidates in both of these constituencies. We chose to invite the parties that were standing in both, and there should be a list behind you of all the candidates for, there we are, York Central. And do we have York Outer as well? There we go. There we go, quite a list. Thank you very much. Okay. Theo, are you there? Here he is, the man himself.
I briefly returned, I won't be here too long. So we'll hopefully just see the overall results. And we have had a big swing, so hopefully, there we are. As you see the Greens. And if we move to the next slide, we'll see how this has changed. take lots of voters from the other parties, so not just Labour or the Liberal Democrats, but Reform as well. And then we shall see just the percentage changes for each party. There you are. And a big loss for Labour, but granted they did have a massive lead to begin with. And now we shall see the results in York Central, and now also York Outer. And I think that's pretty much everything, so have a good evening, everyone.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I'm going to finish with the plea I always make when I talk, we end up talking about politics in school. Young people, if you've got the vote, please go out there and use it for whichever party or whichever candidate you think is right, but go out there and use it, please. Could I thank all of our, and if anyone else wants to join in. Thank you. Could I thank all of our panel members tonight for putting themselves forward and for taking some of your questions. And thank you to all of you for coming along tonight. Thank you for our tech team and the wonders that they have worked. And could I wish you a very safe journey home and good luck to England as well. Thank you very much. Very good. Thank you.